Hello and welcome to Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, a podcast from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, better known as the CPA. The CPA promotes knowledge of the constitutional, legislative, economic, social and cultural aspects of parliamentary democracy, and supports parliamentarians across the Commonwealth to strengthen their democracies, to uphold the rule of law, and to safeguard human rights.
Today we are talking to Honourable Kate Doust, a member of the Legislative Council from the Parliament of Western Australia. Honourable Kate Doust was first elected in 2001 and has been re-elected 5 times. She was the President of the Legislative Council of Western Australia from 2017 to 2021 and was also a Deputy Chair of Committees amongst many other roles. Before entering Parliament, she was also a trade union official. In 2022, she was announced as the first recipient of the inaugural Commonwealth Parliamentarian of the Year award in recognition of her parliamentary service, as well as working to promote women and people with disabilities in her community. Honourable Kate Doust, welcome to the CPA podcast today.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to start our discussion today with some questions about your experience in Parliament. Could you tell us what first inspired you to go into politics and your first experiences of being elected to Parliament?
Look, I've always been interested in politics, even as a child, and having worked for many years in the trade union movement and focusing on industrial relations and health and safety and women's employment issues, and with a young family, I just sort of decided that I wanted to be in the room when decisions were made. And after a couple of rounds was successful in gaining pre-selection and taking up that opportunity in the upper house of Western Australia.
Did your trade union background inform how you approached politics and political engagement?
I think so. I think the work experience has been a good grounding in terms of understanding legislation, negotiation, advocacy, being able to get up on your feet and talk, the odd dealing with hecklers across the chamber, but it also enables you to go in with a plan about what you want to do in your community, to be very active and focused, and to work through a checklist of changes that you want to get through during your time there.
For the benefit of our listeners, could you explain the difference between the Legislative Council and the Legislative Assembly in Western Australia, as I believe that the majority of the Australian state parliaments have 2 chambers?
In Western Australia, our Legislative Assembly has currently 59 members. It's obviously the House of Government. It's the initiator of the vast amount of our legislation, and they do actually have a committee system as well, which is quite active. And then with the Legislative Council, which is made up of 6 members per 6 region, that will change at our next election to statewide representation with 37 members. It is your classic House of Review. So a very good committee set up, and members are very active in those arrangements. We endeavour to do our best all around the chamber to apply appropriate scrutiny to legislation.
You also became the President of the Legislative Council, in effect the Presiding Officer or Speaker in the Chamber. How did this role differ from your role as a member?
Oh, significantly. I was the first woman to be elected to that role in the history of the state, so it was a very significant change for everyone. And because I'd had experience in the chair before, that was quite helpful. It meant that I had a direct say in the management of not just the chamber, but of the building, working with the speaker. It enabled me to participate in a whole range of other activities outside of the parliament, meeting with visiting diplomats and other parliamentarians, which was always very enjoyable and educational. We were able to do some interesting work in and around the building in terms of history, education processes for young people, and working with some external organisations as well. the key thing for me at that point was promoting a culture where it was the People's Parliament and trying to get the people that lived in our state to engage more with their parliament, to actually come through the doors, not just to drive past it. So that was a really important thing for me during that period of time.
Now, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's unique membership includes almost 180 national, state, provincial and territorial legislatures. For Western Australia as a state legislature, what does your membership of the CPA bring to your parliament?
Well, look, I think it brings a great opportunity for our members, given our isolation in Western Australia. It enables members to be able to engage with other parliamentarians from other parliaments, other countries, to pick up on ideas about parliamentary processes that may be different, methods of debate, review. It gives them some opportunities to talk to people about how they manage their work-life balances, to look at just a different type of experience, and it also enables them to use the CPA to help skill themselves up to do their role. So it enables them to sort of push past just their own patch in the world and look a little bit more outwards and globally in terms of what happens in other places, which I think is a real positive.
I think you've sort of touched on my next question, which is around the role that individual parliamentarians can play in the goals of the CPA in terms of strengthening democracy, good governance and sharing of best practice. And so you feel that there is a role for individual parliamentarians to play?
Oh, absolutely. And I know that a number of our members have participated in a wide variety of opportunities as CPA affords, be it attending conferences, going to committee conferences around audit and governance, going to programs where they might be dealing with cybersecurity issues, modern slavery, human trafficking, doing the academy programs. So they then come back from those programs and talk to other members about what they've done. And I think it starts a really good conversation with others about how things could be done differently or better in some situations.
As we mentioned earlier, you were the first recipient of the inaugural CPA Parliamentarian of the Year award, and in recognition of your parliamentary service, as well as working to promote women and people with disabilities in your community. What did this award mean to you and your family?
After I got over the shock, an unexpected privilege, really. I mean, it was really quite humbling, and I think my family was certainly very pleased and surprised, and given that I come from a parliament that is on the other side of the world, a very small chamber, if you like, we were quite surprised that, for somebody in my situation to receive that very lovely acknowledgement. So, yes, very happy.
And the award recognised, as I mentioned, your commitment to diversity of your community and embracing innovation and new ideas in the Parliament of Western Australia. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about this work and some of the innovations that have been introduced into the Parliament?
Oh, during my time there, which unfortunately was also during the COVID period, so that sort of tempered a number of things that happened. But one of the things I was really keen on, having been a parent myself with young children when I came into Parliament, was trying to make changes that supported new parents, be they male or female. We've had a bit of a growth spurt in the last two rounds with younger members having children, or their male members of Parliament sometimes bringing their children into Parliament. So one of the things we set up was a family room in our Parliament for members and staff to use if they wanted to have a bit of quiet time with their children during a dinner break, or if the child was sick and they needed to bring them into the house, rather than having to go into a shared office environment. So that is still being used. We also dealt with the issue of if a woman was breastfeeding a child and they were a member and they needed to come into the chamber, be it a division or another matter, that we dealt with the issue of the child not being deemed a stranger for that purpose, because I'm aware that in some parliaments the member and the child has been removed. So I thought that was a way of trying to modernise the processes. And there's still work ongoing. We also started to look at how to identify and deal with that growth in social media attacks on MPs, and so ran some training for women MPs. And we also had a range of other training opportunities for MPs around legislation, and even expanded our training program for new MPs as they came in. I just think that's really important, rather than just having members come in and get thrown in the deep end and sink or swim. So it was just about trying to put in the appropriate mechanisms, if you like, to assist them along their journey.
And I believe you've also introduced measures for representation for Indigenous communities within the Parliament as well.
We have, over quite a period of time now, we've had members from the Indigenous community as elected members of Parliament. We don't have any quota system, so these people are elected in their own right and capacity and are very effective members of Parliament. We currently have 2 women members from the northwest of Western Australia, and one in each house, and they both work extremely hard. And I know that in community, people are constantly trying to encourage members of the Indigenous community to step up to all tiers of government, and it's a work in progress, but it's a really important change for us to have members with voices in those communities. And in fact, we've had Ben White, who was a young Indigenous member who went on to become our state treasurer, a very successful treasurer, and we're all very proud of his contribution to the Parliament.
You're also the current Vice Chairperson of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, also known as the CWP, which is a network of the CPA that campaigns for equal representation in legislatures and helping parliaments to become gender-sensitive institutions. Firstly, how can we promote the full and equal participation of women in all levels of parliamentary and political life?
Well, I think that's a challenge, isn't it? An ongoing challenge. But I think the work that CWP is doing is very important. And in terms of how you encourage women to step up, I think it's about providing good communication, education, support, training, role modelling, providing mentoring processes to support women, putting in place structures within the parliamentary system that enable a safe and secure environment, an environment where people are able to have open and frank discussions, they don't feel threatened or intimidated, that they are afforded appropriate training to be able to do the job that they've been elected to do, and to have that as an ongoing arrangement. So I think the other difficulty, I think, is trying to identify barriers to entry, and they will be different depending upon where you're placed around the Commonwealth. So I think the CWP, in terms of how it addresses those issues and pulls everyone together and try and find solutions, and then go back and have those discussions with the respective parties and parliaments, I think is a really positive outcome.
What do you think are the main barriers that women face in becoming elected representatives, and did you face those challenges in your own parliamentary journey?
Okay. I'll deal with the first part. Look, I think I referred to some of them. So some are cultural, depending upon where you live, and some might be tyranny of distance. It might be access to funds in terms of campaigning or actually having a campaign team. It could be personal family reasons. It might be a blocker. There's any number of reasons that could be there, and I think you've just got to work out ways of pulling those barriers down. And quite often I think it comes back to those situations of role modelling, mentoring, having those discussions about how you make change. It also, I think, can be adjusted, and we've seen it happen in a number of countries where quotas for women have been put in place, or quotas for a range of people in community. And whilst there has been some pushback, I think it's been demonstrated that where the quotas have come in and opened up opportunities, women have been able to step up more freely. And once you have that happening and get more women into the parliamentary processes, I think you see the tone, the tenor and the dialogue change. And I think then community sees a shift in the focus on the nature of the types of legislation that goes through Parliament with a woman's focus, if you like. And I think that once people see that happening, there's a greater appetite to enable more women to have that. And I think you break down some of those myths about how women can manage the work-life balance in Parliament. From my own perspective, yes, there were some interesting challenges, hurdles to overcome to getting into Parliament. I ran in 1996, was not successful, and so had to wait a period of time to have another opportunity. But since then, there's been a lot of change, so it's not as complicated. And we also find now that whereas in the past, when women did step up, they would be running in either non-held or non-safe seats. We now see in my own country where more and more women who are active within parties and wanting to move into Parliament are now getting opportunities in safe seats, in held seats. And that's been a significant change, not just in outcome, but a shift in attitude to how women should have, be treated equally in terms of opportunity to access a seat that they can win.
I know that you've also campaigned on addressing and combating domestic violence against women, and I wanted to know what role parliamentarians can play in this campaign.
Oh, look, I think a really important role, and it's not just within the formal structure of Parliament. It's out in the community. It's engaging with women in that space, with the NGOs, with the providers of shelters and services, talking to them about what they need, going in as a lobbyist on their behalf, if you like, within your own party, and then certainly pushing for change within the Parliament, bidding for budgetary allocations to support those organisations, trying to get better infrastructure in place or arrangements in terms of the forensic checks that are required in that arrangement, changing legislation which is much more supportive of domestic violence victims and perhaps apportioning a greater penalty to the perpetrators, and also then talking out in community via our own communication methods, newsletters, and community engagement to demystify the situation and to convince the community. And I think it has happened. There's been a significant discussion in Australia where tragically we've lost a high number of women in recent times to domestic violence. So I think there's a change in culture, a change in attitude, but members of Parliament can drive that at a variety of levels to achieve an outcome. You're never going to fix everything. There's no one solution, so you have to come at it from a variety of ways. And I think it's one of those opportunities where people can work across party and across parliaments to achieve change, and we can work outside of our own parliaments to see what's happening around the world. And I know that's something that the CWP certainly, and through the CPA, has certainly been involved in doing.
I'd like to turn to the future. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the modern Commonwealth, and it offers an opportunity to reflect on where we have come from and where we are going. What does the Commonwealth mean to you today, and how can it ensure that it remains relevant?
Well, obviously, it's much more global than what I used to think about, and I think the opportunity to engage with other members of Parliament has been really significant from all around the globe. So I think to maintain the relevancy, I think those conversations are important. I believe that the capacity to engage with other members around the Commonwealth enables you to pick up on ideas and practices and processes that will either enhance or change your own arrangements. And by building those networks, those relationships, the peer-to-peer relationships, you open up dialogue on a whole range of other levels. And I think that's why the Commonwealth's important, because you have those opportunities that you may not have if you're not part of that arrangement. And so I think that strong network is really important. And I think that's something that we can maintain, and people do work very actively to do that. It's just a great pathway. So part of that, in terms of how we continue, because there are a lot of challenges with democracy. Democracy can be very frail from time to time, and we see that happening in a range of places around the world. So I think education of parliamentarians is really important, making sure they understand the primacy of Parliament versus the executive, and how to work through those challenges. So it's a work in progress, but I think it's paramount that we sustain the Commonwealth and the democratic processes that underpin it.
You mentioned education, and so how can we continue to engage young people with the Commonwealth and also in the parliamentary democracy that it promotes?
Well, I think we need to go back and start talking to children in schools about democracy and where it's not happening already, and talk to them about the role of a parliament and the role of the member of parliament. Then the other thing I find quite useful, which I know happens in a range of our parliaments around the world, youth parliaments, which I think are a fantastic opportunity for young people to get that experience and to think about where they might want to go if they choose to go down that pathway. I think the other challenge is how we deal with media and social media, because quite often younger people only get their news from the social media avenue, and it's not always positive towards either the Parliament or the role of the parliamentarian. And so I think we have to work out ways to be able to put other options in their way, more information, better education, and enable them to understand the value and the role that Parliament makes in their daily life with the decisions that are made. I've always thought being a member of Parliament was one of the best ways to interfere in somebody's life in a positive way. So the idea of young people stepping up is very important, and have a range of views and experiences. So we should be doing everything we can to have them either coming into the Parliament, to have it as a much more structured part of education, to enable them opportunities to engage and practice, work experience in members' offices. That's something we've tried, and just gives people a little bit of a taste of the work that a member does, breaks down some of the myths about what we might or might not do, and I just think that, and certainly the work the CPA has done in the area of the youth parliaments and enabling access to information has been very significant in that area.
Honourable Kate Doust, thank you very much for joining us today on this episode of the CPA podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's special episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth. If you liked what you heard, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcasting app to stay up to date with our latest episodes. To find out more about the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, visit our website at www.cpahq.org or follow the links in the podcast description.